How do we make it through the winter with our limited feed supplies right now? Uh, it's going to be a challenge. There's no question about that. But what I'd like to talk about today is how do you change your feeding program to adjust for nutrient requirements for the beef animal? Use of straw and byproducts. I know there's a lot of canola green feed and silage and grazing, a lot of regrowth that was cut for crop. It's a little late for regrazing right now, but it was a good feed source. We'll talk a little bit about that. Nitrates and sulfur always comes up when you're talking about canola or silages. Water quality comes into play to a certain extent, and I'm going to break away from the true presentation and talk a little bit about water for next summer as well, and how water quality could be impacted because of the low dugouts this year. What do we have for protein supplements? How do you improve the utilization of the feed so that you don't waste more than what is absolutely necessary? The hot topic this year is liquid molasses on straw bales. We'll talk about that and what it actually does and what else you need to do. Processing grain, and then evaluating what happens when a cow gets thin. How do you know that your rations are appropriate for what you need? So with that, you can see that nutrient requirements increase with time as you hit calving. You'll get an increase from mid to late pregnancy, and then a 25% improvement or increase in nutrient requirements once those cows start lactating. Your peak nutrient requirements or feed intake will be approximately 12 weeks after calving, just because you need time for the involution of the uterus and the reproductive system to provide more space for the rumen to expand and digestive system to expand. And unfortunately, it takes 12 weeks to maximize feed intake, but your peak milk production occurs 8 weeks after calving. So there's that little bit of discrepancy in how do you feed that first 12 weeks to optimize production, and then how do you change things off when you get later into the lactation. Once you get to weaning, you can see that the production cycle or nutrient requirements go down both for energy and protein. And how do you adjust your feeding programs so that you will feed efficiently and manage your feed as effectively as you can? So this is a slide that came out of the NRC, and they're talking about reproductive efficiency, immune function response. But this is where the rubber hits the road. So for example, if you're on the optimal stage on the left-hand side, you hit a period of time where your feed quality isn't as good, or some reason these cows are not getting as much feed as they require. The first thing that goes is your immunity. So you're going to have more problems with health. And then enzyme function. It's basically the catalyst that improves the metabolic efficiency of the animal. It's once those are gone, your overall animal efficiency goes down. The next level of loss, immunity, enzyme function are the first things to go. At a lower level of nutrition, your production levels start to decrease, your reproductive efficiency drops. And then in the blue shaded bar, the minimal reproduction nutrient requirements. That is from NRC. And unfortunately, what I say when I see that, those animals are usually in an environment where they're in perfect environmental conditions, in a barn, and no problems with wind, cold temperatures, rain, cold ground to sleep on. So I always say that is the absolute minimum in perfect conditions. I would raise that bar considerably for what we have in Alberta for conditions right now. Once you get below your minimal requirements, you get into the deficiency symptoms where you will see clinical symptoms of problems. And once you start fixing your nutrition program, it's not immediate. It's not going to be something that happens overnight to see the response. It's going to take a couple months, 3 months to really get those animals back into that optimal state again. So short story on this one, try to eliminate the reduction in quality in the nutritional quality of the feeding program so that you don't have to go through that slump and rebuilding phase. Nutrition, it's a moving target as far as I'm concerned. The theory of a first limiting nutrient is what your own animal is only able to produce as efficiently as the first nutrient that is deficient. So on the left-hand side of this slide, you can see that the protein is the limiting nutrient in that ration. They went ahead and moved to the right-hand side. The protein deficiency has been solved to a considerable amount. And then you can see that the next limiting nutrient is energy. And this continuum always keeps on shifting and moving. So it's something that you always work on to see how you can get everything to work together so that you can have everything there at the appropriate amount and not have any excesses and definitely not have any deficiencies. So good for theory. Nutrient requirements. This is the question that, this is where the rubber hits the road. And it all depends on the type of animal. Is it a Dexter or is it a Charolais? Are they in mid-pregnancy or in lactation? Are they open? Are the cows in good condition? Do they have shelter? Are they protected from the weather? And also the other side of the coin is, what do you want those animals to do? Are you happy with an 80% pregnancy rate, or are you looking at 95? Do you want 65% of mature cow weaning weight when the calves are weaned at 205 or 210 days? So those, you can get a good generality, but putting the specifics on it makes a big difference. So rules of thumb that I use for energy and protein requirements at different stages for a mature cow, mid-pregnancy, 7, 9, and 11% protein for mid, late, and after calving. Energy requirements go from 55 to 65%, again, from mid, late, and after calving. You can see that there is an increase due to the fact that the fetus does a lot of growing in that second and third trimester, 65%, 70% of total calf growth in that late stage of pregnancy. And then you get a 25% increase in nutrient requirements when that cow is lactating to produce the milk and also to get herself ready for the bull in 90 days. On the feeder calf situation side, it's a little bit harder to give you a good number on this. Guidelines: 1,000-pound animal needs 10% protein. For every 100-pound reduction in weight, the protein requirements go up by 1%. And this is for a situation where you've got purebred animals. It's a good guideline if you really want to get your calves to stretch and frame out, but you can probably get away with slightly less protein for a commercial cow. The purebreds, they want to maximize the growth. They want to maximize the bone structure and stretch on that calf as early as they can, because that early growth is the most efficient growth that an animal will have. If you noticed, I didn't put any numbers down there for energy on that previous slide. Just give me 2 seconds. I'll go back one. You can see that I don't have a TDN or energy requirement. And that's because it all depends on what you want for average daily gain on those animals. Are you happy with 1.5 pounds, or are you pushing for 3? And that really makes a big difference on how much energy the animal requires. So as a rough rule of thumb, on, let's say, a 6-weight calf, if you're able to feed 1% of body weight in grain, plus the remainder a good quality forage, you should be able to average 2 pounds a day gain on that animal. So how do we use the feeds that we have this year and make the most efficient use out of it? In mid and late pregnancy, straw is a good filler. It can be any place from 30 to 40% of the total feed intake of that animal, as long as they're in good condition. Oat, barley, wheat, those are your cereal straws that typically have relatively the same amount of nutrients in them. Oats being the preferred straw, especially if it's any of those straws a year old, better intake than fresh straw or stuff that was combined last fall. Peas, faba beans, lentils, and canolas, being in that brassica family, all being, being 3 of the 4 being legumes as well. You'll find that your canola, lentil, pea, faba bean straw, higher protein content, higher calcium content compared to the cereal straws. The biggest thing with any of the straw rations is your intake is limited to the total nutrient neutral detergent fiber content in that material. And as a rough guideline, cows will stop eating when they have consumed 1.2% of their body weight in NDF. The animal's full, the animal is satisfied, they'll stop eating. Now, an example of a straw grain ration for a pregnant cow, say a 1,400-pound cow in good condition, she's expected to eat roughly 2.5% of their body weight, or 35 pounds a day of dry matter. So that could be 40, 42, 45 pounds of a straw hay ration with 15% moisture. You want to limit your NDF to a maximum of 60% in the ration. And the big thing there is when you have too much fiber in a ration, what happens, the bacteria take a longer period of time to digest the lignin and the hemicell and the fiber components within that NDF fraction. So instead of a 24 or 48 hour residency time of that feed in the rumen, it may take 72 hours for it to pass through the digestive system. So if you have extra fiber sitting in the rumen or sitting in the digestive system, that limits the amount of feed that they can consume on the next day. And what that does is it restricts feed intake. And anything over 60%, that is a potential problem. So most of the times when you're looking at a 1,400-pound cow, 17 to 21 pounds of straw is typically what they can eat, depending on the quality. Now, the remainder of ration, straws, your cereal straws, typically 5% protein, 43% TDN. It's a good filler. You'll also need to add extra protein and extra energy. So to that ration, roughly 8 pounds of barley or 9 pounds of rolled oats. If you're looking at corn, you're probably looking at 7 pounds of corn a day. In late pregnancy with the higher requirements, your grain component goes up to 11.5 pounds, plus 1.5 pounds of canola meal. Or if you're looking at oats, it's 13 pounds of oats and 2 pounds of canola meal. So it's a moving target, like I mentioned before. You're also going to require extra limestone, magnesium oxide, a fortified trace mineral salt with selenium, and vitamins A, D, and E. You can also use a high cereal straw or swath grazing type mineral that has 20 to 24% calcium, 3% phosphorus. That'll do the same job as trying to do this on your own with products at the farm. Slew hay and straw, or using half straw or slew hay and half green feed. Mid-pregnancy, half and half works great, 15 pounds of each. Considering the straw or slough hay to be roughly the same quality, green feed definitely going to be a higher quality feed. Again, you need the limestone and the magnesium oxide or a high cereal or swath grazing type mineral. In late pregnancy, your green feed's going to have to go up to about 65 to 70% of the ration, or 25 pounds, and the rest being either slough hay or straw. And again, the same amount of calcium and phosphorus or calcium and magnesium that you needed for the previous ration. Low quality forage use after calving. Straw is not an option in my mind. If you are absolutely in a situation where you have no hay or no other forage, it's a struggle for one reason. It takes a lot of management. You're going to need to feed that cow someplace around 18 pounds of grain a day, preferably fed twice or three times a day. And you cannot feed that amount of grain all at once. And there's going to be supplementation for extra protein as well. It just makes it very, very difficult to do. So if at all possible, use the straw and low quality feeds prior to calving, and use your hays and silages, the better quality feeds, after calving. Don't know if there's much of this around this time of year, but out of Edmonton, the potato growers empty out their warehouse in Edmonton, and basically, if you've got your name on the list, you can get potatoes from them for $10 to $15 a ton. Now, these cull potatoes are 80% moisture. The safest way to feed it is to put it into a grain bag, let it ensile. Sorry for that, folks. I got to turn this off. What they do is they take the potatoes back home, use a bagger, a silage bagger, put the potatoes in it, have the bag situated that there is a slight slope and there's going to be one end of the bag being lower than the other, and let the potatoes ensile. There's going to be a lot of water coming off of this because those potatoes are basically cooking and getting soft. And the extra water, cut a little hole in the bottom of the bag, let the water drain off, reseal it, and then it'll ensile properly. So when you're all said and done, the moisture levels come down, your protein content is about 9.5%. Energy density is the same as barley. If you're feeding them whole without any processing, you can have some problems with choking. The only other thing is, if the potatoes are out in the sunlight and they get green color, you may have a presence of solanines, which is a toxin which will cause problems for the animal. So it's an option, not very much of it around, but if you can find it, great. The other thing is sometimes there's French fries from a manufacturing plant that are up for to get sent out to another use on the farm. Those French fries contain about 30% oil or fat. So your limitation there is you're probably going to feed no more than about 3 to 4 pounds a day of the French fries. Same quality as the raw potatoes for protein, but your energy density is going to be up by about 20 to 30% because of that fat content. Grazing and baling crop regrowth. Saw a lot of this year, especially with the canola crops that were written off and used for salvage. The quality of this product is extremely high, 14 to 16% protein, 62 to 65% TDN. So call it as good as a medium to high quality alfalfa grass hay. So it works very, very well. It'll take the cows a couple days to get onto the feed. So if you can find some baled canola green feed or regrowth right now, it's a feed that should not be overlooked. It's a good option. two problems, nitrates and high sulfur content. So in this situation, I'm going to cover the nitrates first. Cattle are the highest risk animals for nitrates. Sheep are more tolerant than cattle. Horses are a modified ruminant, only 3 stomachs, so they're not susceptible. And then the monogastrics are not a concern at all. So what happens with nitrate poisoning, when the feed is consumed, it's chewed, it goes into the rumen, the natural process for nitrates to can be converted to nitrites, and eventually to the ammonia and excreted out of the animal. But the nitrites, when the levels go up in the rumen, they're transferred to the bloodstream. And what happens then is the hemoglobin, which is responsible for carrying oxygen to the tissues, they change shape into methemoglobin. And what happens then is it does not have the ability to carry oxygen to the tissues. And when the levels get up to 70 to 80% of the total hemoglobin being converted, you're going to have dead animals. Now, the other compounding factor is when you have the higher nitrate levels in the bloodstream, it's recirculated back to the mouth, and when saliva is produced, and it also goes back into the rumen. So you've got a feedback loop that continually makes the problem more intense. Now, acute poisoning, this is typically what we find is when you have more than 1% concentration in the dry matter, then you start having higher risks for nitrate poisoning. As I mentioned before, you can't transfer the oxygen to the tissues, so the animals are found dead by hypoxia or lack of oxygen. The reconversion from nitrates to nitrite are very rapid, so that's the problem, is how do you get that nitrite out of the animal? If you've got green feed that has been baled a little bit tough, and you've got heating problems, and you can smell the tobacco or the green feed's a dark brown color instead of green, you'll have conversion of nitrate to nitrite within the feed itself before the animal consumes it. And nitrates are 10 times more toxic than nitrates in a feed. So the other thing is, if you've got contamination from surface water getting back into the well or into a dugout, you could have nitrate accumulations in the water. And that all accumulates and is part of the whole picture of what you need to consider. So nitrates is something that can be managed and is preventable for having losses, but it takes a bit of extra management to know how much you can feed, how long do you take to introduce the animals to the high feed, or how do you gradually increase it. And unfortunately, the first symptom that you see with nitrates is a dead animal. Sulfur and polio. In a feedlot situation, if you have more than 0.4% sulfur in a ration, you can have problems with the occurrence of polio. Sulfur, when ingested, combine it with water, you get sulfuric acid, you drop the pH in the rumen. Bacteria and microbes that produce thiamine are killed off. And without the thiamine, the brain swells and the animals die because there's too much pressure in the brain. So it's something to be careful with. In a higher forage ration, you can probably go a little bit higher than that, but to be safe, I like using that 0.4%. And again, it's not just what's in the feed. Your sulfur content in the brassicas, the canolas, the turnips, the radishes that you have in some of these pasture mixes, they can have fairly high sulfur content. The big problem, though, is when you have a canola field that is written off and is going to be used for feed, they generally put a fair amount of sulfur on the crop to produce the canola seed. And without the production to use up that sulfur, it stays in the plant and that's why you have your accumulation. Water quality. There was a situation back in 2017 where the grazing reserve in northwestern Saskatchewan moved animals from one paddock to the other. 5 days later, they found it was roughly 200 dead animals on site. And what they didn't know for sure was what happened when they first looked at it. They did a bunch of water sampling from the dugouts, and they found that there was high levels of sulfur, which caused polio. It's something that I'm mentioning here now because if we don't have adequate water to run off and fill the dugouts, or if you don't have the flushing of the dugouts and you've got a lot of high concentrations of TD, total dissolved solids, or sulfur or nitrates in the water, you could run into problems next summer. So it's just a preventative or something to watch out for if we end up with another dry year. So when the results came back from the tests and we found out that the animals that died of polio, Saskatchewan Agriculture went ahead and tested 2,500 different dugouts and found that 50% of them were not of adequate quality to be used for livestock water. And the reason for that is the quality was down, but also when you get higher temperatures and increase the water intake on a lactating cow, your total consumption of the minerals is what you're worried about. So, for example, that 1,400-pound cow, if it's only 25 degrees, she's lactating, she'll consume roughly 63, 65 liters of water. Now, the guidelines state that you should have no more than 2,000 milligrams per liter of sulfur in the water. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. And I'll agree with that when you've got 25 degrees, but it's a moving target. If you get up to 34 degrees and the cow doubles their milk or doubles their water per consumption, you can see that even at that 2,000 milligrams per liter or parts per million, the sulfur levels are way too high. And in that situation, I would say your limit is going to be someplace between 1,000 and 1,500 milligrams per liter. So you've got to be careful. Water tests will give you an answer, but the animal, depending on how much water it consumes, will be the deciding factor if it's safe to use or not. Again, a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's something to consider, is if instead of having cows walk into a dugout, if you can have them drink out of a portable water tank or some sort of wet well situation where they're not walking into the dugout's fenced off, you'll see that from Dr. Wilm's research in 1990, the cows that were drinking out of a pumping system, they gained an extra 15 pounds in 30 days, or half a pound a day. And the reason for that is if they drink more water, they're able to consume more feed, they can gain more weight. Those cows that were on that program were lactating and had a calf to support. And you can see that again, in 30 days, those calves gained an extra 20 pounds, or 2/3 of a pound a day. So it doesn't take long to recoup the expenses of putting in a watering system. And if you're grazing yearling steers or on pasture, half a pound a day difference in rates of gain. So talk to Battle River or your county. There are some programs still available under the CAP program for getting assistance to pay for some of this equipment to get it designed and engineered. So it's an option that might want to fit in some situations. Now back to the feeding programs. The different types of protein sources that are available this year, typically peas, lentils, corn and wheat distillers, they all have higher protein, 24 to 39, 40% protein in the distillers grains, 24 in the legumes. Great source to add into both cow rations, feeder rations, or even into creep feeds. Unfortunately, two problems exist this year. One is the cost is through the roof, and two, the availability. I talked to the canola crushers and the ethanol plant yesterday, and what both the distillers and the crushers told me was canola and the distillers grains, they're completely booked up until the 1st of April, so it's not available. Peas and lentils, not many to be found. Price is restricted, but if you have a possibility to pick up screenings from a seed cleaning plant, that might be an option. The calcium and phosphorus in the grains are about normal, what you'd have compared to against cereal crops. The peas being a little bit higher in calcium. Phosphorus levels are the same, magnesium levels are the same. But when you get into the distillers grains, you're getting a lot more calcium, or calcium is about the same, but your phosphorus content can be double to triple of what you would find in barley or oats. So you got to be careful with the calcium phosphorus ratio. They also are in a lot higher in the magnesium as well. Overall, good options if you can find them. The energy contents in the corn and wheat distillers are the same as what you find in barley. Energy in the peas and lentils, again, same energy levels as in barley. So the big advantage of using these products is to bring the protein levels up in that ration. So some of these products, canola meal 38, barley at 12, malt sprout pellets 22%. The one that is an option, not as a crop byproduct, rather than that, it's urea, 281% protein. It's manufactured from natural gas, no different than the urea that you have going into the ground to fertilize crops. But the big difference is feed grade urea has been scrubbed a couple times to ensure there's no heavy metals present in that product, which can affect animal health and longevity. Some of the other options that we have is brewery products. Can be 28% protein. Phosphorus, again, is higher because it is a byproduct. Can have 9% fat and 50% NDF. So I would say your limitation would probably be 4 or 5 pounds a day, just due to the fact that you have 9% fat. If your total ration exceeds 7% fat, it impairs rumen function. The material in the rumen does not turn properly. And if you don't have the proper movement or rotation of the material, it cannot expel the gases that are produced during fermentation, and you can run into bloat problems. Most of the brewery products are a high moisture product. Some of them are dried, like the picture that's there. But if you're feeding this in the summertime, when it's when temperatures are up, you want to feed this out within 2 to 3 days, because it can start to spoil and cause problems with digestion. Wheat mids and mill run pellets, byproducts of the flour industry. Good for protein, low calcium, very high phosphorus again, energy content roughly the same as oats. And the last time I looked at wheat mill run, it's $370 a ton. So that comes out of the feed mills, or excuse me, the flour mills. Again, availability is a problem, but it is something that can be used to feed animals. Oat hulls, oat groats. You've got the oat plant at just outside of Nemeo. You're always getting some hulls off of that. Prices are any place from $40 to $60 a ton at the plant. Energy content about the same as a low quality hay, depending on how much grain is in that product. It might be the same energy as a good quality hay. Again, variability in protein content, but it's a good filler. It can replace straw if you're short of straw. Oat groats, not much of that around, but it's something that can be used as well with the higher phosphorus content to watch out for. Urea, we chatted about the 281% protein equivalent. It's a non-protein nitrogen source. So basically the ammonia, when an animal consumes a feed, the protein is broken down into amino acids and then back down into urea. And then it's up to another group of bacteria to rebuild that urea into the types of protein that's needed for either growth, meat production, or milk. So if you're looking at a 32% supplement that you can buy off the shelf, you may have two numbers on the label, like for example here, a 3218. That indicates that your total protein content is 32%. 18% of that protein is coming from non-protein nitrogen. No problem for animals that are over 450 pounds, but in order to utilize that extra nitrogen, or in that nitrogen, free nitrogen form, you need to have soluble carbohydrate. And the easiest way to do that is to feed about 3 pounds of grain a day to utilize that nitrogen or to capture that nitrogen. It helps feed the rumen bacteria and microbes so that they can digest the fibers better. And then some of these bacteria that only have 20 minutes of lifespan, when they die off, they're passed into the lower digestive system and they become microbial protein for the animals to use. So it helps. Calves under 450 pounds do not have a digestive system that can handle the urea. So basically it's a waste. It just goes right through them. But for mature cow feedlot animals, it works very, very well. Limitation is your maximum amount of protein from NPN is 25%. You also need to have a minimum of 0.15% sulfur in the ration. With conventional protein found in plant or grain, there is an amount of sulfur in that. Pardon me. Now, there are 4 amino acids that require sulfur. And if you don't have that, it's going to reduce the growth rate and not have an efficient animal. So that's why I'm saying that if you don't have the protein, normal protein going into them, you have to maintain that minimum of 0.15% sulfur. Feeding itself is part of the consideration. If you're feeding into bunks or feeding into a manger type system or a way to prevent the animals from walking on the feed, you're going to reduce the waste and they're going to get a better quality ration. Some of the work we did in Lacombe back in 2009 is we used a bale processor feeding on snow or into bunks. That was the first year of the experiment. The second year experiment, we went ahead and used silages. So results were feeding on the ground with a bale processor, 19% loss. Unrolling the bale, 12.3. Big thing is your protein and calcium losses are a lot higher than the physical losses. And the reason for that is 75% of the material that is lost in this experiment was the fine material, the leaves, the flowers, the high quality portion of the feed, anything less than 3/4 of an inch in length. So your actual nutrient content loss is much higher than the physical waste. So for example, in these rations, The hay was 11.4% protein from the feed test result. When we calculated backwards what was in the wasted feed, the protein content actually consumed by those cows was only 8.6%. With the silages, 26% loss. There was a shortage of feed delivered to those animals because of a delivery error. And I would expect that number to be would be higher than that, probably in that 35% range to be realistic on when they're on full feed. So it's, with feed costs the way they are, anything you can do to put it into a bunk or prevent the animals from walking on the feed. If you're feeding with a bale processor or delivering feed out onto the pasture or onto the cropland, if you can set up an electric fence to allow the animal to eat from one side of the windrow and they can't walk over it, that's probably an option that'll help. You got a question for me, Karen?
I do. Jim asks, I was gifted 138 cattail bales from a grain farm next to me. Can these be incorporated into the feed ration?
Cattails, low quality slew hay, protein content is only going to be 3 or 4%, TDN about 40. So a really low quality forage. I would consider it to be no different than flax straw. So if you put it out in bales and they consume a couple, 3 pounds a day, that's about the best that you can expect those cows to eat. So put it out for bedding, or if you want to put it out for in a bale feeder, the cows will eat some of it, but it's not going to be very great. All right, I shall continue.
Thank you.
Limit feeding in 2002, when we had the last major drought, the Kinsella Ranch went ahead and fed cows a lower forage quantity than what is expected, and they fed more grain to make up the differential. They provided the protein and supplemental minerals to these pregnant cows, and what it was they went down to 0.5% of hay per day. Granted, the cows weren't happy about it. They always looked up when they heard a feed truck roll by or some noise, thinking they're going to get more feed. But the rations were balanced well enough that they did not lose weight. They maintained their pregnancy, had no problems at calving, and minimal problems with calf birth weights or having troubles with having calves pulled. Now, what they found was 0.5% of body weight of forage during pregnancy is possible, but they did a lot of management, a lot of inspections of these animals, and they said in a more extended period or an operation where you're on the farm, they're saying a minimum of 1% is what they consider to be safe to do. So in that situation, what they did was they fed 14 pounds of straw, 11 pounds of barley, and a pound of 32% supplement in mid-pregnancy. If they went to a grass and a grain rather than the straw, again, limiting the forage to 14 pounds a day instead of 26. You're getting a total of 22 to 26 pounds of intake rather than the typical 35 pounds a day. Late pregnancy, they had to bring up the grain to 14 pounds and grass hay again up to 10.5 just to meet the energy requirements. So it is possible. The only difference between 2002 and now is grain at that time was only about $3 a bushel, not 9 and 10. So economics comes into play as well. If I had $1 this year for everybody that asked me about putting molasses on straw bales, I'd be able to retire. But this is a product that is around. It becomes more apparent or more prevalent in years when feed supplies are tight and you want to use straw in the ration. Now, my concerns are is there an attitude that, yes, I've done something, I've fed my cows, I've added some supplement to it, I'm going to be fine? Or is there a situation where you've got a very good salesman come around and they're saying, well, this is all you have to do and you're going to be fine, you don't have any other troubles? Well, I beg to differ. Your cost to factor on this, you're going to be applying any place from 70 to 100 pounds per round bale. So the cows will get 1.5 to 2 pounds a day of molasses. If that cow eats 20 pounds of straw, it's going to help. There's no question about that, but it's not the whole answer. So one of the products that's on the market right now, 32% protein, yes, that's definitely going to help. But your calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium levels are very, very low. It's hard to keep those nutrients or those ingredients in suspension. And if you can't keep the concentrations constant from the first tub that you pour to the last tub when you're getting an inspection done or registration, they will not register the product. That's why they're that low. Trace minerals typically are reasonable. Vitamins, this one has a lot of vitamin A and vitamin D, but it's short of vitamin E. And the cost at the time when I put this slide together was 25 pounds. I'm hearing it's now 28 to 30 or even higher. So yes, you're going to see an improvement in in protein. Energy levels, not so much. 2 pounds of molasses will give you the same energy as what you'll get out of 1/2 pound of barley. And again, no changes in calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium. The numbers in brackets are the percentage of nutrients supplied compared to what is required. You can see that, your potassiums, your salts, they go up dramatically, but unfortunately, some of these others do not. So it's not the total answer. So for that cow in late pregnancy, if it is eating 20 pounds of straw and they're getting 1.4 pounds of molasses, you're still going to need someplace between 12 to 13 pounds of grain, plus your high calcium mineral, or in this case, probably cheaper to add the extra limestone and magnesium rather than buying a complete mineral. Also, some extra vitamin E. If you supplement with a 1-to-1 mineral or a 2-to-1 mineral, it won't work. You need the higher levels of calcium, higher levels of magnesium. Salt and mineral supplementation, because yes, you can feed them the straw, you can feed them the grain, but how do you get the mineral into them, or how do you determine if they're actually getting enough? And the problem with free choice supplementation is they're not going to come in every day and take exactly what they require. So for example, cows, they'll only visit the salt station once every 4.5 days. And consumption can be any place from 1 to 770 grams or 1.5 pounds a day. So it's very hard to tell what animals are getting what amount. You may go out and say, yeah, I'm going through a bag of mineral a day for 100 cows. It's the recommended rate, but how do you know that they're all getting the same, or if some are getting any at all? Calves tend to be more curious, and they'll really get into a mineral program or into a mineral station and eat, 2.5 pounds a day in the worst case scenario. So if you can get your salt and mineral and vitamins into a grain mix or a TMR with silage, that's the most efficient way to put the minerals and vitamins out. So you can get 3 to 5 ounces of mineral consumption per day, depending on what the product is. If you're mixing at home, a 1,400-pound cow will eat roughly 35 grams of salt. You need that 50 to 100 grams of limestone, which is 2 to 4 ounces, some magnesium oxide and molasses, or excuse me, magnesium and the vitamins. Now, if you're finding that you're not getting enough intake, always provide the salt and mineral together. Don't have the mineral on one side of the feeder and a block of salt on the other. Move a salt station or a salt feeder to the loafing area, because cows will eat 75% of their mineral at night. And if that doesn't help, start adding dried molasses to the mix. 5 to 7 pounds to a bag of mineral and salt as a starting point, and use that molasses to help regulate the intake. Bushel weights of barley.
Hey, I have another question.
Sure.
I have another question for you, Barry, here. It's from Anonymous here. So they say I have kosher wheat bales. They tested 15% protein, low TDN, nitrates were good. I am putting them through a processor, mixing with some alfalfa and grass hay, probably 35 to 40% of the ration up against the bunk. I am finding they are sorting through it and not eating much of the kosher. They have free choice as much as they want. Should I say tough luck and eat it? They don't seem hungry, but it seems they are not consuming it as much as I like. I have put approximately 40 liters of molasses and tried that. Should I switch to a lower barley or oat straw in the ration? That's a big one.
Kochia is something that if it's cut late, it tends to be very stemmy, no different than reed canary grass or like what the cattails are. So it's less likely that the cows will eat it because it is that, lower quality feed. The other thing you have to watch out with kochia is it can be very high in salt content as well. So in this case, if the cows are in good condition, my suggestion would be to reduce the amount of straw and see if they will eat more of the kochia. It's like I treat a cow no different than a 5-year-old at a kitchen table. They don't like eating the Brussels sprouts or broccolis, but if they can see a dish of ice cream, they're going to really go after it. So what you're trying to do is make them eat more of the kochia so that they can adjust to the taste and be more willing to take it. But you got to be careful. If you're forcing them to eat too much of the kochia and they're not eating it, those cows can start losing weight. So be careful, watch the condition of the cows. If they're doing well and you can see that the intake has increased within 4 or 5 days, then that's what you get at after the 4 or 5 days is probably about where the maximum is. So it's worth a try, but you may have to switch back and do something a little bit differently, just because kochia is one of those feeds that sometimes they take it, sometimes they don't.
Awesome. Thanks, Barry.
Yep. All right. Trying to reduce the cost of some of the feeds that you're providing to the cows. You don't need to have a 54-pound bushel weight barley to feed the cows. They did some work at the U of A back in 1985, and they compared the 4 bushel weights of barley feeding to steers. And they found there was no difference in performance down to 42 pounds, but once they went below 42 pounds, they had a 1% drop in feeding efficiency. So that 37-pound barley took 5% more feed to get the same rate of gain on the steers as the 42-pound barley. Now, they didn't do the work on pregnant cows, but you can also apply this information to them because they basically have the same digestive system and same ways to digest the feed. So if you can find that lightweight barley with, even if it's a $30 or a $40 a ton discount, it reduces the cost of feed that you're providing to the animals. Feeding corn. Corn is something that has 10% more energy on a pound for pound basis versus barley. So you treat it about the same as what you have from energy you get from wheat. Unfortunately, corn's 10% less protein than barley, so easy comparison there. We treat it the same as oats. So it is a good feed. It's coming in at about a $40 advantage over barley right now. So it's more economical to feed as long as you can get it, home at a reasonable price. The advantage of corn is it's got a slower starch digestion rate than barley. So less problems with bloats or acidosis or grain overloads. So when you're changing from barley to corn, it's very seamless. You just reduce that feeding rate by 10%. I'd still do a gradual change over about a week to 10 days. Start off with 25% corn, 75% barley. Work up to half and half. Go to 3/4 corn, 1/4 barley. Stay on that until the barley's all gone, and then go to the full corn ration. Now, with the higher rate of digestion, barley is a lot more of a concern to feed than corn because of the starch. Less starch or higher starch rate in the barley, the more rapid digestion rate. So going the other way, when you're going back from corn to barley, you're going to have to really watch the manure to make sure it's in good shape. The cows are eating well, everything looks good before you make those changes. So I'd be more concerned if you're changing from corn to barley. Grain processing. The young calves under 700 pounds are very inquisitive. They like to taste their feed. They like to chew their feed. They do a better job than a cow or anything under 700 pounds, over 700 pounds. So changes in digestibility. Oats, if you roll oats or grind oats, you're going to have about a 5 to 7% improvement in feed efficiency. Barley's between 12 and 15. Wheat is 25%. Now, corn, on the other hand, you're only going to get a 3 to 5% improvement in feed efficiency. The reason for that is the corn is such a big kernel that when they start ruminating and chewing their cud, they do enough chewing to break that kernel open, and the cows will get their nutrients or digestion rates up. So corn's not that big of a problem. Your rolled product or rolled grains should be between 70 and 75% of the original bushel weight, which is the rolling index. If you're not getting that 75% of bushel weight, you're rolling it too fine. If it's too heavy, you're not processing it enough. But the overall thing to watch out for is you don't want to have more than 5% fines over a 1 millimeter screen, because once you get too many fines in there, acid production goes up in the room and more chances of acidosis and bloat. So how do you do it? Wheat, rye, and triticale, break it into 2 pieces only. If you grind it finer than that, you're going to increase the risk of bloat and acidosis. Barley, hammer mill, roller mill, break it into 2, maybe 3 pieces. Sometimes in a barley, you'll see a line across the kernel when it comes out of a roller mill. If you rub it between your finger and thumb and it breaks into 2 pieces, that's the great thing. That's exactly what you want to have. Corn, scuff the surface, crack the coat. If it breaks into 2 pieces, okay, that's about all the processing that you need. It's all right to see a certain percentage of grain coming through whole. I'd rather have that than having too many fines. Rumensin and Bovatec both improve feed efficiency by 6 to 7%. So it'll improve average daily gain. It's also a coccidiosis preventative. The nice thing is it seems to stabilize, both of these products seem to stabilize the rumen, so you have less digestive upsets. And of course, with less acid and digestive upsets and ulcers, you're going to have less problems with liver abscesses. Right now, the economic return of using Rumensin or Bovatec is about 5-1. So very economical to put it into your feeds. Now, the biggest thing when monitoring a feeding program is to look at the cows and see what's going on. If you can use a body condition scoring, if you're familiar with body condition scoring and you know how to do it, it's a better way to evaluate the condition of the cow rather than evaluating by the look of the cow, especially in the wintertime when there's a lot of hair. You won't see a change in body condition in a cow until she loses between 150 and 200 pounds with a full winter hair coat. But both of them are useful. So you can see that the cow on the right was definitely something that was not getting enough groceries. And on the left, the animals with fresh grass and high quality feed, they're definitely looking pretty darn good. So a cow in good condition, you can add more straw and low quality roughages into the ration because their energy requirements are less. The muscling in these animals is in good, the strength, muscle strength is good. You're going to have less calving problems. A cow in good condition compared to one that is thin, the thin cow will need an extra 1,400 pounds of hay just to stay warm. Not to gain weight, just to stay warm over the winter. So there is an advantage to have these cows in good shape before winter hits. Animals that are in moderate condition, you can see just above the shadow. Yeah, go ahead, Karen, sorry. You have a question for me?
Yeah, I do. I just have a quick question here. Shiana, I think I'm gonna unmute you because she just asked, what about, was it here? What about oats? So I'm gonna unmute you because I'm not sure what she's talking about. So Shiana, here you go.
Hi, Barry. I just wondered when you were talking about rolling and stuff, but you didn't mention oats. I just wondered how many pieces or what's the best? Just flatten them out a tiny bit?
If you crack it into 2 pieces, that's more than adequate. But with the hull being loose on oats and only a 3 to 5% improvement in digestive efficiency, it's going to cost you a lot more to run the equipment and the time to get that grain ready for feeding. So it's your choice. If you want to spend the time and do it, good on you. But I don't think it's a good use of time and money for, paying for diesel fuel or electricity to get that feed processed. I'd rather just see it fed whole.
Okay, and so in any of the rations that we do in cow bites and stuff, when we're talking about oats, that's talking about whole oats, or do we need to allow for a tiny bit more for the loss of going straight through?
No, you should be fine.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
Now, Cheyenne, if you want to see if your grain is being utilized by the animal, take a look at the manure. Are the kernels empty? Put on a neoprene glove or a latex glove, kick the manure around and roll the kernel, especially barley. If you see the barley in there, roll it between your finger and thumb to break that hull apart to see if it's actually got any meat or content in there, or is it just the hull?
Okay.
And the other thing you can do if you're still not sure, you can always use the chew test and see if there's anything really left inside that kernel.
I'll bring that to you, Barry, to do that.
Okay, sounds good.
Awesome.
All right. Now, the cow in moderate condition, and this picture turned out better than I expected because where you see the shadow of the cow on the one to the right, the short ribs and the indentation in front of the pelvic bone, you can see that that triangle starting to drop off and a shelf being present, that's showing me that that cow is probably 100 pounds short of weight right the way it is. So that's an indication of what your cow condition is like. The thin cow, you can see the tail head, you can see the backbone, you can see the hip bone. If the shadow wasn't quite the way it was, it's good to show the distinction on this animal, but it doesn't show that shelf that was present in the other one. The ribs would be the short ribs would be very apparent. This animal is definitely in the need of at least 200 pounds of weight gain before calving so that there's no problems. So it's these thin cows, more problems with having a healthy calf. There's a fetal imprinting that goes on where the calf is only able to develop and have the ability to use the nutrients to a certain extent or have a certain size of organs when the cow is not providing the adequate amount of nutrition, and that will negatively affect that calf throughout its lifetime. The other thing is it's very difficult for these thin cows to produce an adequate amount of quality and quantity of colostrum to help that calf at birth. So when you've got that thin cow, and a body condition score of 6 in the US system is the same as the 3 in Canada, you can see that the IgM, or short-term immunity, is double when you've got a cow in good condition versus one that's thin. The long-term immunity, or IgG, there's about a 20% change in immune function. So if you've got a lot of thin cows, it's possible that you're going to run into a lot of sick calves within that first 2 weeks of calving. So do whatever you can to improve the condition of those animals. The other side of having the thin cows, like I mentioned before, the vertical red line in this slide is what the maximum feed intake is for the cow. And the peak, the lactation curves, the peak occurs 8 weeks after calving. So if that cow doesn't have the energy to produce the milk, that reduction of milk production isn't just off the peak. It just doesn't flatten off the peak. It's a reduction of throughout the entire lactation. And with young calves, when the cow is able to take a pound of fat off her back, it's enough energy to produce 7 pounds of milk. And for these young calves, if they can consume 7 pounds of milk, they're going to increase 1 pound of calf gain per day. So it's a big impact over the entire lactation. Reproduction wise, thin cows, even when the bulls are turned out, a third of those cows are not cycling and cannot become pregnant. Those at good condition, you can see that 91% were cycling 60 days after calving. And that's what you want. You want to see those calves cycling 1 cycle before the bulls are turned in. Improves first service conception rates. You get more calves in that first 21 days in the calving season. Gives you an extra 40 pounds of calf to sell in the fall, and probably a better quality package, which may help your price as well. So how do you evaluate the ration? Take a look at the manure. The cow isn't going to tell you much other than when you were talking about the kosher and the cow's not eating it. That's one way to evaluate the ration. Does it work or not? But the other side is look at the manure. The one on the left-hand side at the bottom of the screen, that's in a dairy barn where they were running with a problem of acidosis. So you got that real slimy, sloppy water type manure, low pH, quick transition or transportation of the feed through the rumen. The picture on the right, where you can see the manure is fairly flat and looks, granted it's a little bit rough, but it's that's due to freezing. But if it was the summertime, I'd consider that to be a nice flat cow pie. That's what you want to see in the ration. In the low quality ration, if you're not getting enough proteins into those rations, basically you're going to get what I call onion rings or pyramids. Your digestion of the fiber is down. The cows can't eat as much feed. Microbial populations are down. So you're not getting all the nutrients out of that feed and you're restricting feed intake. This one, again, almost a combination between a onion ring and a pyramid. Really low protein contents, high fiber content. Going to have to either feed a lot more high quality forage or include a bunch of grain in that ration to make that manure look normal. So there's different ways that you can evaluate the ration, even though, you know, we can't speak cow. Use your eyes to see what those animals are doing. So the only thing I can suggest is in a year like this, where you've got a bunch of different feeds that can be used for feeding a cow through the winter, you need to have a feed test done. It's critical. You can't just guess at what's going on. If you do have a bunch of straw and lower quality feeds, use them when the cows are in mid or late mid pregnancy and late pregnancy, and save the high quality forages till after calving. Energy requirements are greatly influenced by the body condition of the cow, ability to bed on straw, stay out of the wind. So whatever you can do to make that animal more comfortable in its environment, it's definitely going to help. Get some help. Get some advice from a nutritionist when you're building the rations. And I don't, you know, you can get it from a feed company, independents. If you're good at running cow bites at home, please do so. It's a tool that can be used. But try to figure out what you actually need. And the biggest thing that you can do, especially in a year like this, when if you're feeding a lot of cows low quality forage, you're going to have 10-15% of them that are going to lose weight or not do as well as they should. Separate them out. Either feed them by themselves as a group, or if you have to, turn them in with the replacement heifers, 600-700 pound replacement heifers, because they are getting that higher quality ration. So